success. What is success? What is success? According to the Webster Dictionary, it is an accomplishment of an aim or purpose. When you accomplish your aim, when you accomplish your purpose, they define that as success. And if we were to go by that definition, then success can vary according to everyone in this room. And the reason why I say that is because every one of us, we have different aim and different purpose. For some of us, our aim is to be rich. If that's the case, then wealth can be defined as success. For others, happiness could be defined as success, or raising good kids, or healthy living, or living till 100, or for some, making it to heaven is the ultimate success. But as a Christian, it is very important to know what God considers to be success. And there are many measures in the Bible, like being obedient, faithful, or long-suffering as, being successful in God's eye. But today, and using this passage, I want to share with you the principle and the means in which God tells us how we can achieve success. Because we all want success. We all want to achieve success. But how do we achieve success, even in God's eye? And according to this passage, it says the secret to success in God's eye is having a servant-like heart. It's simple as that. God says, if you want to have success in my eye, there's only one answer, one secret, and that is having a servant-like heart. Let's go back and read the passage, verse 25, from beginning 25. It says, Jesus called them together, the disciples. He called them together. He says, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. He's talking about, these people, they have authority, they have power, and they exercise their power and authority. And how officials, they exercise authority over them. But Jesus said, not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you. Jesus said, if you want to become great, he says, you must be a servant. And he said, whoever wants to be first, because everybody wants to be first. But if you want to be first in the kingdom of God, he says, you must be a slave. And then he gave an example of his life. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. According to God, if we want to become great, if we want to come in first, if we want to be first, we must have a servant-like heart. But before we go any further, we need to first define what does it mean to have a servant-like heart. This definition can be found in Philippians chapter 2 through 7. I'm going to read you one passage where he says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves, which is a form of a servant. In other words, what Jesus is saying is that in order to have a servant-like heart, it means you must consider meeting the needs of other people more important than meeting your own need. Meeting the needs and wants of other people must be more important than meeting your own needs and wants. To me, this is only logical as a Christian. But here lies the problem. And the problem is our natural human tendency or sinful nature that exists in every one of us. It tells us to do exactly the opposite. Our sinful nature or natural tendency tells us we desire to put our needs and wants above the needs of others. And we must be honest, oftentimes that's true. We want to put our needs and our wants above the needs of others. Clear example actually can be seen in the passage that we just read today. I want you to go back and let's kind of go back and what's happening in this situation. In this passage that we read, what is happening? Jesus and his disciples and others, they're walking towards Jerusalem. And along the way, what does Jesus do? Jesus explains to his disciples what's about to happen. And what's about to happen? Jesus tells them, I am about to be handed over to the Jewish leaders and be condemned to death. Not just any death, but I'm going to be mocked, tortured, and crucified. Wow. How horrifying, right? And yet, in the very next verse, and to me this is the most interesting, one of the more interesting parts of the Bible. It's just interesting. I'm not saying it's good. It's interesting. In verse 20, after all that Jesus just said about what's about to happen to him, what happens? The mother of James and John, sons of Zebedee, she approaches Jesus, and what does she say? What does she say? She said, oh my God, oh my goodness, no, don't go, don't do that. I am so sorry about what's about to happen to you. Oh, is there anything that I can help? Is there anything that I can do? That's what she should be saying. But what does she say instead? Instead, she goes up to Jesus. Why? Because she wants to ask Jesus for a favor. And what is that favor? She asked Jesus, can my sons, James and John, be given the highest honor and the highest position next to you, Jesus? When I first read this passage, I'm like, unbelievable. Jesus just shared that he's going to Jerusalem. And he's going to be condemned to death once he gets there. Not just any death, he's going to be mocked, tortured, and crucified. And the only thing that's in the mind of James and John's mother is not about what's happening with Jesus, but she's thinking about, man, I want my two sons to be in a position of honor. It's like Richard coming to me, the healthy runner, coming to me and says, Pastor Paul, next Friday, I'm going to have a triple bypass heart surgery. My arteries are just clogged up, and if I don't do this, I'm going to die. So next Friday, I'm going to have a triple bypass surgery. And what is my response to Richard, him saying that? I said, Richard, can I make an appointment with you next Thursday before the surgery? Just in case you don't make it out of surgery, I want to make sure that I can get my free medical checkup from you. That is unbelievable. What would you think? What would he think if I were to say that to Richard? It's like, this guy is so selfish, so self-centered. I just shared with him that I'm about to have a triple bypass surgery, and the only thing that's in his mind is that I can get a free medical checkup from him? Unbelievable. In this passage, Jesus states that we often see people in high position and exercising power and authority. And in the earthly culture, we often see those things as symbol of success. But Jesus says that simply isn't so in his eye and in the kingdom of God. Jesus states that the true greatness or success in his eye comes from humility and service, not power and authority. True success only comes in humility and success. And to me, this is the awesome part, and I say this all the time. When you really think about and examine what Jesus says and what Jesus taught, you come to realize that this just isn't true. You know, when it comes to church or spiritual realm, that this is really true in almost every facet of our lives. Over the many years, as 26 years as a pastor, I've witnessed many failed relationships, and I've counseled many couples in trouble. Do you know what the main reason for those conflicts? Do you know what is the main reason why so many people have relationship problem? When I talk to them, when I listen to them, the answer really is simple. It's the approach. It's the approach that the husband has. It's the approach that the wife has, or the boyfriend or the girlfriend has. When I counsel young people, I say this quite often. I say to them, loneliness cannot be the main reason for marriage. For that matter, wanting children cannot be the main reason for marriage. Or pleasing your parents because they pressure you so much. Or wanting financial security. Those things cannot be the main reason. Now, listen carefully. Loneliness, wanting family, wanting to please and honor the parents, or wanting financial security. Now, none of those things are wrong. Why? That's only natural desire that every one of us have. And that's a need that God has placed in our hearts, but it's not wrong. What I am saying is those reasons cannot be the main driver for wanting to get married. Why? Because when you examine every one of those reasons, what you see is a very self-centered and selfish reason. And whenever anyone goes into a relationship with a self-centered approach alone, we will most likely experience three things: pain, suffering, and failure. And the reason for that is because the selfish needs that we have, those needs can never, ever be satisfied. Why? Because as human beings, we always want more and we will never be satisfied. Because selfishness can never be satisfied, thus resulting in pain, suffering, and failure. Here's a simple illustration. Let me just ask you, what would happen if I were to ask maybe 6 people in this room, hey, let's go out to eat, and what do you want to have for lunch? What do you think will happen if I ask six people? What kind of answers do you think I'm going to get? More than likely, I'm going to get 6 different answers. If I were to ask Richard will say, Pastor Paul, I love seafood. That's what Pastor Lum told me. You love seafood. I like it too. If I ask Pastor Lum, I said, and then Pastor Lum said, no. I want steak. He says, that's right. If I were to ask Han would probably say, meat. Let's go to barbecue. How can you eat? You got to have meat. Steak is good, but it's too expensive. Barbecue, you can eat a lot at Rudy's. If I were to ask William was like, I'm craving pho. I'm craving pho. If I were to ask, Oz will probably say, no, we need to go to maybe a Latin American restaurant, the fancy ones where they, what do you call it? I don't even know, caramelize the meat for 6 days or something like that. And then if I were to ask somebody like Lisa, you know what she'll say? It's like, nah, let's just go home. I'm tired. Let's just order out and let's just eat at home and watch TV or something like that. And what's going to happen afterwards? More than likely, when I ask those questions and if we get all these different answers, the end result will be what? We're going to have conflict. And those conflict will end up in confrontation. If everybody wants it their way, and everybody approaches anything with a selfish ambition and selfish approach, all it's going to do is end in conflict, which leads to confrontation. On the other hand, if everyone approaches this simple situation with a servant-like heart, servant-like attitude and approach, what will happen? You're still going to have a conflict, but in a good way. You know why? Because Richard will say, no, I can have seafood anytime I want. What do you want? And Pastor Lom said, no, what do you want? I said, no, it's okay, I can have barbecue anytime. And Lisa will say, it's okay, I'm willing to go out just for you guys. I don't need to go home afterwards. And same thing with us. And everyone's going to say, no, what do you want? And you're going to have a conflict in a different way, in a good way. But here's the difference. But this type of conflict brings unity and closeness, not confrontation. Remember that nothing good ever comes out when we approach things with selfishness. When our approach is to serve, to put the needs of others first, then that aim and purpose can always be accomplished. Why? Because success of that aim and purpose is solely dependent on you and you alone, and not on any outside factors. Therefore, when we approach things with selflessness, we'll always be satisfied, we'll always accomplish success. Again, when I counsel young couples, I often ask them this one question in the beginning. I ask them, why do you want to be married? Why do you want to be married? And they tell me all these different things, and and the things that I mentioned. I'm lonely, and I like having somebody next to me, and I want to have a family. Again, those are not wrong answers. But after they share all of those things, I then challenge them. I challenge them by saying, when I looked at a girl, I say, as a wife, one of your greatest aim and purpose in marriage has to be to serve your husband by helping him to become a man that is successful and respected. That has to be one of your greatest aims in your marriage. And vice versa. I tell the men, I look at the men and says, all those things are great, but one of your greatest aim and purpose has to be to serve your wife. Your goal has to be to make her happy by loving her and sacrificing your life for her. That has to be your approach in marriage. If it's not, then you're going to experience the same thing that I just mentioned. 3 things I mentioned earlier. If your approach is not, you're going to experience pain, failure, and suffering. I tell them, don't go into a relationship thinking this is what I want, this is what I need. The worst thing we can do is to go into a relationship thinking that by marrying someone, all my financial needs are going to be taken care of. I will no longer be lonely. I'm going to have somebody to clean the house for me or cook for me. Or finally, I'm going to have a family and children and things like that. If that's the only approach that you have, you will surely be disappointed. Why? Because human beings, we will never be satisfied. Why? Because we always want more. And we always need more. Again, Jesus said that in order to be successful, we must approach every relationship, not just marriage, every relationship, with an attitude of a servant. We need to have a mindset whenever we enter into a relationship. What can I do to help this relationship? How can I make this relationship better? How can I serve rather than what benefit is there for me? Again, this is not just true in a relationship between a husband and a wife or a man and a woman. It's true in every relationship. It's true in work and business as well. Several years ago, I saw a very interesting investigative show in Korea. And what they were trying to figure out is what makes small businesses successful. Because in Korea, and a lot of you guys don't know this, and this is a big issue in Korea. In Korea, a lot of retired people, and once they retire, in Korea, most people retire between the age of 50 and 55. Isn't that sad? Large corporations, they forcefully retire people. And nowadays, a lot of young people cannot get full-time work. So what is the option? A lot of these people, they start small businesses. And here's the problem. The research shows that 4 in 10 businesses that people start, small businesses that people start, 4 in 10 fail within the first year. And they say within the first 5 years, 7 out of those 10 businesses, they all close doors. 7 out of 10. And this is a big problem. So this TV show decided to go around and look for the small businesses, restaurants that have survived 5 years and that are thriving after 5 years. And they wanted to find out, what is the secret to your success? What is it that you're doing that is different compared to all these other people who are failing? And the answer that they've discovered really was surprising. Because for me, I was expecting some business answers, about, margins, about marketing, about management, about leadership. And this is what I thought I was going to hear. But the answer that I heard was very simple and very enlightening. And according to this investigation, all of the successful small businesses really had one common belief and business philosophy. You know what that was? All of the owners of successful businesses shared a belief that their aim and purpose as a business owner were 2 things. Their aim and purpose, they said there was 2 things. You would think it was profit or getting big? No. 2 things. 1, their aim and purpose was to, number 1, serve their customers. And number 2, serve their employees. When they first presented that discovery, I was thinking, what? Serve their customers, serve their employees? How can you become successful if you do that? Isn't the purpose and the aim of running a business is to make a profit? Shouldn't that be your aim? Or to have lots of revenue? Shouldn't that be your aim? And when they said no, the commonality that all the small businesses and the success they had was that these people, their mentality was, you know what? I want to serve my customers, and two, I want to serve my employees. But the more they explained, the more I thought about it, it made absolute sense why this was the key to success. Because these owners and these business owners, when their mentality is to serve their customers, what do? Their aim is to provide the best product, exceptional service. Think about it, if you were to use a small restaurant, running a restaurant as an example, I realized something. Which restaurants do I want to go to? Number one, I want to go to inexpensive restaurant. And number two, I want to go to an inexpensive restaurant that serves quality food. And what happens if I really enjoy this place, enjoy this restaurant? I'm going to invite other people to join me at that restaurant. And the word of mouth will spread. And then what happens? You develop, a customer loyalty. And the more I thought about it, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is so true. This makes so much sense. I don't know why I didn't think about it from this perspective before. And I thought about, as an employer, if my goal is to serve my employees, what do I want to do? I'm not there to use them and abuse them. I want to make them successful in life as well. I want to make sure that they are taken care of. One of the biggest problems that companies have is, employee turnover ratio. What happens whenever people quit all the time? You have to train new people, and employees that are not happy, they're not going to do their best, and they're not going to serve the customers. And the more I thought about it, I'm like, man, this makes absolute sense. And what they said was, and when they interviewed the people whose business failed, they interviewed them. So, what was your aim? What was your vision? What were your ideas and thoughts when you started the business? And these people that just said, they say the same thing. I was hoping that in the end I was going to make about $5,000-$6,000 profit at the end of the month. I was just thinking, man, I just hired the right people and good people, and I can just sit back and watch them run the business, and I just thought it was going to do well. They all say similar things. Even when I talk to friends who are business owners, they tell me that the ones that really they get promoted in their restaurants or in their company are not necessarily the smartest or the hardest working, but the ones that actually get promoted in their business are the ones whom they believe to be the employees that are truly loyal to them. And when you really think about it, those people who are truly loyal, who truly care about the business, they also tend to be the hardest workers. People that find success are the ones that are perceived to have the best interest of the company, a servant-like heart. Not somebody who's coming to work just to get a paycheck, but rather they're there because they truly care about their company and the customers that they have. And those are the ones that achieve success. Jesus is always right. That's something that I've learned over the years. Success comes when we approach relationships with a servant-like heart instead of seeking to be served. This is also true, not between a relationship between a man and a woman, or in work or business, but this is also true in our relationship with God and His church. As I said earlier, I've been pastoring now for 26 years, and let me share with you the people that in my view, makes positive impact at church. The people that make positive impact in church, from a pastor's perspective, again, are not necessarily the most gifted ones. People with beautiful music talent, or gift of leadership, whatever, or people who have a lot of money. Those are not necessarily the ones that make the big impact. The one that makes true impact in a church really are the ones with a servant-like heart. Those people who come to church with an attitude of, what can I do? What can I do to serve this church? And what can I do to serve the pastor? When we approach church with an attitude of, I want a church with good music, with good preaching, with good children's ministry. Again, same thing that I mentioned earlier will happen. Over time, we're going to experience pain, suffering, and failure. We're going to experience failure because, you know what? We cannot grow without serving. Think about it. What kind of people never serve in life? What kind of people? What group of people never serve? Babies. Babies and infants are the only ones that do not serve. Once you grow up, once you get older, what is our expectation? That these people no longer, they're just going to be crying and whining and everything's done for them. We expect them to feed themselves. Not only feed themselves, but when they get older, we expect them to help out. When we do not have an attitude and approach to serve, we will never grow. Because only babies do not serve. 2, we experience suffering. Why? Because when we do not approach church with an attitude of a servant, the church won't grow. In fact, when we approach church without the attitude of a servant-like heart, then we're doing the church more harm than good. Why? Because we're approaching church with the wrong attitude, and I've always said this, attitude is contagious. And we're going to be suffering because our church won't grow. Our children's ministry will not grow. Our worship team will not grow. Our Bible says every aspect will not grow. And 3, we're going to experience pain. Why? Because you're not going to last long at the church. Because unless we're truly committed to serving, you know what's going to happen? Unless we're truly committed to serving, more than likely we're going to leave the church at the first sign or the first moment of hardship or conflict. Why? Because what's the point of staying? If our approach to coming to church is like, I want this, I need that, and I want the church to meet my needs, and the moment that need is not met, what motivation, what reason is there to stay? And when you leave, what's going to happen? We're going to experience pain, because more than likely, we're not going to leave with the right heart and the right attitude. One of my mentors, my old pastor as a young man, he once told me this story. And when he first said it, again, it didn't make sense at first. But then over time, he was absolutely right. And this is what he told me. He said, Pastor Paul, don't be so excited and don't get so happy when old Christians from other churches come to your church. And I'm like, why not? Because at first, as a young pastor, I'm thinking, man, more church members, the better. If old church members come from other churches, man, it's going to make our church grow. And the older they are, more experienced they are, they can do more. That was my mentality. That was the mentality of almost all my peers. And I'm like, it doesn't make sense. But he continued. He said, you know what? Usually the people, like long-time Christians and who are leaders at other churches, when they leave that church and when they come to your church, usually they come with their own expectation. What he meant by that was, when people like that come, they have their own idea of the way church should be. They have their own idea of, what they want, what they've enjoyed. And when they come to the new church, what happens? They put their same expectation upon the new church. In their mind, they think, the praise team is not like the way it used to be back then, Oh man, why did they have this on a weeknight? Back there we did it that way. Always they think we used to do it that way. In other words, they're coming with an approach of like, you know what? I want this church to meet my needs, instead of coming with a servant-like heart and saying, you know what? I need to come and what can I do to serve? This is what happens when we have a wrong approach. But on the other hand, when we approach with an attitude of, what can I do to serve the church, instead of being served, both you and the church will benefit and grow immensely. I want to share this by sharing an example with you. Over the years, I've been blessed by many great church members. Really, that's one of the greatest blessings of my life. I've had so many great members. And I was thinking, about, as I was preparing this message, who would be a good application, example, illustration to this sermon. And one person immediately stuck out, and I'll tell you his name. His name is Chris Moon. Chris Moon. One day, Chris came and visited my church when I was pastoring in Austin. And he came, and it's not a big deal because, at that time I had a church about 120 members, and it was a campus town, and we had many visitors every week. It was not a big deal to me also because oftentimes when young people come, singles come, they're church shopping. They're going to different churches, and nothing wrong with that, as long as you do it with the right attitude. And so I don't really make a big deal out of it like I do here at Forgiven Life. We're a small church, so whenever one new visitors come, I'm like, God, But this guy stuck, at first he didn't really stick out to me. I greeted myself, I talked with him. I found out after the worship time, during the fellowship time, I had a chance to know him, and I found out that, actually he was pretty special and unique. He was a West Point graduate. He's very tall and good looking and cutest dimple you ever seen. That sounded weird coming from me. He's a West Point graduate, and he was a captain in the Army. And they had just transferred him to a base in Killeen, Texas, which is only about an hour away from Austin, where I was serving. And then he came, and he says, I got to know him better. But I didn't think much about it. Until the following week, he came back to church. And that surprised me because, not surprised me, but that made me happy because he wasn't church shopping. But instead, after coming to our church, and our church, he says, was the first church he visited, he decided to come back to our church. And after that, this is what I remember. Chris coming up to me and looking at me, just like an army officer, coming to me, looking at me straight in the eye and says, Pastor Paul, is there anything I can do to help you and serve the church? Just let me know. If there's anything I can do, just let me know. I was impressed, but I didn't really think much about it. Why? Because I've kind of heard that before. Sometimes, people say things, but the actions don't always match the words that they share. Another thing is, again, I told you, when people say that, alarm bell goes off in my head. Because whenever newcomers say that, I'm really wondering, are they really wanting to serve? Or are they coming with a personal agenda? So this is usually my response, and this was my response to Chris. I said, Chris, before you can serve, I really appreciate your heart and your attitude. But before you can serve, these are the things that you have to do. And I told him flat out, one thing is you have to join a house church. You have to be part of a house church because our whole church and ministry is based upon house church ministry. Another thing is you have to take the 11-week Bible study course that I teach. This is something that all members are required to take, And I said, before you can do anything else, you have to do that. And he looked at me once again like a typical Army officer, looked at me and says, done. Simple as that. He says, done. Okay, he says, and just let me know if there's anything that I can do for you. Again, I've heard that before. But I noticed something different after a few weeks. What I noticed was Chris was active in every activity that we had. Mission trip fundraising. He went to house church. He signed up for the 11 weeks Bible study course. And you know what? During that semester, guess who was the class president? It was not Richard, because he wasn't there. I asked him, I tell them, who wants to be the class president? And you know what the class president is. They're in charge. They have to do everything. He looked around and says, I'll do it, Pastor Paul. And over time, whenever we had flag football activities, different activity, every time Chris would say, Pastor Paul, is there anything I can do for you? Is there anything I can do? Do you need any help? And then I would just tell him, can you come early and set up things? Done. Can you stay a little after and make sure that everything, nobody left anything behind? Done. Can you try to get some items donated for our mission, fundraising? Done. He does it. Go to the military. He even brought his, fellow soldiers to come during our fundraising events. Eventually, during that time, he went to our Cambodia mission trip with me twice. And Chris, in my eye, became a leader. He became a leader by example. A year and a half later, Chris ended up leaving our church. Not because of any conflict or problem, but he ended up because he had finished his term and he had decided to go get his MBA. And so he went to New York to further his education. But before he left, he visited my office. And in my office, he gave me a small gift. It was a shirt. I still have it. It's a shirt. It says Army in the front. I told him I wanted that. It looked cool. And then before he left, he thanked me. And he thanked me by sharing with me that before he came to Austin and my church, he said he hadn't been walking with God. He hadn't been going to church a lot. Actually, he's been away from God a while. And the only reason he came to our church was because his mom kept nagging him to go to church. But he thanked me. He says, Pastor Paul, he said, I've really, truly grown and learned a lot this past year and a half because of you. Truth is, the reason why Chris was able to grow was not because of me or the church, but I believe it was mainly due to his attitude and his approach. Because Chris didn't come to be served. Chris came seeking to serve. And in my view, it was that attitude that allowed him to grow and find success. He was such an encouragement to me, and he was such a blessing to our church because of his attitude to serve and the example that he set for others. And like I said earlier, attitude is contagious, isn't it? Forgiving life. Even as your pastor, I'm not perfect, but I pray for you guys. And in my prayer, I'm always saying, what can I do to help these people grow? Help them find success in your eye and in your kingdom. Because truly, and I believe I speak for Pastor Lum, I know I speak for him as well when I say, as pastors, we want every one of you guys to experience success. We want all of you guys to experience success in your marriage and in your relationship, in your family. We want all of you guys to find success in your workplace and in your business. But most of all, we want all of you guys to experience success in your relationship with God, in your personal relationship with God. I want all of you guys to become great in God's eye. I want all of you guys to be first in the kingdom of God. And the only way we can accomplish that is if you approach every relationship with a servant-like heart. I want to meet the needs of others, meet the needs of the pastor, of the leaders of the church. By doing so, we will experience success. That is the key. That is the secret to success, according to God. Let's pray.